Join as we learn Chumash for today for the Torah readings of Tazria-Metzora. This year, the learning cycle for these two Torah readings are combined. So we'll be learning Tazria and Metzora together. So when we do the Torah readings, it will be for the one that's combined. Chapter 12, verse 1. Last week's Torah reading, we spoke about the impurities and the defilement of how it would work for the animals, and if somebody touches and comes in contact with the carcass of an animal and so on. These now two Torah readings tell us about the impurities and defilement and ritual impurities for the human. Chapter 12, verse 1. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lamer, and God spoke to Moses, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, coming back now to the laws pertaining to laws of ritual impurity. Lamer saying, Isha, if a woman, ki Tazria, if she gives birth, when she gives birth, v'yolda zachar, will give birth to a male. Now, v'tama, because of this she becomes impure. Whether this woman now miscarries, or even if it's a dissolved fetus, how much more so, if she becomes, she successfully gives birth as well, she then becomes impure, shivas yamim, for 7 days, kimei nidas tevoisa titma, like the same degree as she would become impure during the time of her menstrual flow. Rashi, Isha ki Tazria, Omer Rabbi Simloi. Rabbi Simloi explains, why now does the Torah only tell us after the laws of the impure and non-kosher animals and impurities pertaining to the animals, does it tell us about the impurities of the human? And Rabbi Simloi explains as follows. It's just like humans were created after all animals in the time of creation, so too when it comes to the laws pertaining to the human being. Is explained after the laws pertaining to the animals and the birds. Ki Tazria, when she will give birth. Why doesn't it just say when she gives birth? Why doesn't it even say when she conceives? L'Rabbis, it comes to teach us that even if the child was a miscarriage and dissolved before giving birth to a live child, she still becomes impure. The mother becomes impure, an impurity of childbirth. Like the impurities of the days of her menstrual flow, so the way she becomes impure anytime she would have a menstrual flow, so too she becomes impure when she gives birth. Even if the womb opened without any blood coming out, this will still be considered, if there was no blood at the time she gave birth, she will still be considered impure, like by her menstrual period. The word that the Torah uses for a menstrual period is word devoisa. What does that word come from? Miloshan davar azov bigufa. It comes from the word, like we find in the book of Deuteronomy when it says ukiyamecha davecha. The word devoisa comes, that's something that flows from the body, a bodily flow. Loshin acher, another word for it, or bodily discharge, like we have later on. We're going to learn about the zav and the ziva. Loshin acher, another terminology for it is loshin madve v'choli. It comes from the word madve, which means an illness. And this refers to the pain and the illness that a woman gets when she gets her menstrual flow. There is no woman that does not get any pain when she gets her menstrual flow, either that her head or her limbs are difficult for her, and therefore there are pain and suffering that comes with it. And that's why the word devoisa comes from the word madva, which means pain or illness. Verse 3, by Yom HaShmini, and on the 8th day, Yimel Psarar Lasei. If the boy is healthy, then the flesh of his foreskin must be circumcised. This is the time where the Torah mentions about the commandment of circumcision, though it's mentioned earlier in the book of Genesis by the story of Abraham, but this is where it's given as a commandment. Verse 4, Ushloishim Yom Ushloishim Yamim. Now for the following 33 days, she will then remain in a way of defilement, of impurity. Teishev bidmei tara. She will be then in the time where her blood, as we're soon going to explain, where Rashi tells us that at this point the uterine blood will not make her impure, but she would still be considered ritually impure, and therefore b'chol kodesh leisiga, she may not touch any holy food, which means like the truma, the food that the Kohen eats. V'la migdash leisave, she will not be able to enter into the holy temple, into the sanctuary, ad melois meitara, until these 40 days of her purification have been completed. Rashi explains what this means. Teishev b'dmei tara. Teishev, it doesn't mean that she actually has to sit. Elolosh nakava means she has to withhold herself. Like it says, Vayeshev aleni mamri, that they stayed in Kadesh and aleni mamri. B'dmei tara, what does it mean in the blood of her impurity? Afal pisharei adam, even though she may see blood from her usual menstrual period, tahira, she would still be considered impure because this is not something which has to do with the child purity defilement that she has. B'dmei tara, leima pekei does not have a hey. Who's shamed of her? It's a noun. Yemei tara, the days of her purity. B'ma pekei, which is stressing the meaning. It's telling us on the woman that she is the one that has to sit during this time, meaning she has to withhold herself from anything which is holy. Yemei tayar shalah, these are the days that she becomes pure. During these days that she becomes pure, Loi siga, Rashi continues, she does not touch, even though we mentioned clearly, while it tells us, while it mentions the word not touching, this really refers to as well as hara lo'ichal, she's not allowed to eat from holy items during the time of her purity. It's like it's explained in the tractate of Yevamis, of what the extra teaching it tells us here about touching and eating and so on. B'chol kodesh, and anything that's holy. What does it mean in all that is holy? L'rabbi says truma. This comes to include the food which is given to the Kohen, during the times of her impurity of the woman. She is not allowed to eat any holy food, as well as the food that is given to the Kohen, which is then considered as holy food as well. This is different when it comes to a woman who has just given birth, different than any other type of impurity, because all the other types of impurities, they're only not allowed to eat truma only for the day that they're impure. After they go to the mikveh and night falls, they're allowed to eat already from the impurity. However, when it comes to a woman who gave birth, she has 40 days that she has to be avoiding these foods because she's considered impure until she has those 40 clean days. This is considered one long day. Because she technically purifies herself. She goes to the mikveh, she immerses in the mikveh after the 7 days, or by a female after the 14 days. However, she's still not ritually pure that she can eat from the truma, from the holy food, until the day after the 40th day. Tavias kaparas tarasa, which then she will bring her offering, her sacrifices, and only the evening of that day is she allowed to then resume back to eating the holy food. Verse 5. If she gives birth to a female child, the tamashvuayim, then she becomes ritually impure for 2 weeks, kanidasa. The same degree, that means these 2 weeks will be just as if she became impure during her menstruation period. And now 66 days she will then stay in clean days. She would have, just like by the boy with the 40 days, so too by the woman, for a female it's 60, by the boy was 33 days, and by the girl, when she gives birth to a girl, it's 66 days that she has to stay on her 66 additional days where she is now in her days of cleanliness. These are not where the blood source is not a time of defilement, as we mentioned previously by the male. Verse 6, once this days, the period of her purification is now being completed, whether it was for the boy or the girl, tavi keves ben shnasi leila, she will then bring a sheep in its first year, that's a year old, uben yoina, or a young pigeon, a tur, or a turtle dove, lechatas as a sin offering, al pesach or moed, by the entrance of the tent of meeting, el ha-kohen, to the kohen. So this is the day after the 40 days, or the additional 66 days by the woman, which is the 80 days complete. That's when she will bring the sacrifice. Rashi, v'hi krivoi, L'medcha comes to teach us, even though these are sacrifices of the ascent offering and a sin offering, Limedcha comes to teach you that only one of them refrains or restrains her from eating from the holy food. Which one is it? This is the sin offering. How do we know this? Because it says further on in the verse that the Kohen will then atone for her and she will become pure. The one that becomes atoned, that means the animal, the sacrifice that atones for the sin, that's the sacrifice that allows her now to be pure and eat from the holy food. V'tohara, and she will become pure. Miklal, what do we know from here? That until now she was considered impure. The meaning, even though she may have immersed herself in the mikveh 7 days or 2 weeks after giving birth, still in all, she is still considered impure until she actually brings the sacrifice. Verse 8, V'im loy timtza yada l'deisa. What happens if she cannot afford a sheep or verse 7, V'ikrive, V'ikrive lifnei Hashem, and she will bring it before God. V'chiper aleha, and he will atone for her, v'tara, and she will then become pure, m'ker dameh, from the source of her blood. This is the laws that are applied to a woman who gives birth, whether to a male or a female. As we just learned in the Rashi said that it is the sin offering that is the one that refrains her from eating from the holy food. Once she brings a sin offering, she then considered pure to eat from the holy food. Verse 8, if she cannot afford for her sin offering a sheep, she can take then 2 turtle doves, or 2 pigeons, or 2 young pigeons. One would be for an ascent offering, and one for a sin offering. And the Kohen will then effect atonement for her, and she will then get rid of her defilement. She will now be ritually pure. Rashi, one for a scent offering and one for a sin offering. The Torah doesn't preface one over the other, only telling us because the scent offering is mentioned first in the Torah, as well as the scent offering is the one that is more important because it goes completely to God. But when you bring it to the altar, it can be the sin offering before the scent offering. This is what we learn in the tractate of Zvachim. What we see over here is that the woman has to bring these 2 sacrifices after her days of purity. Many ask the question, why does a woman have to bring a sin offering after giving birth? What sin did she commit that she has to bring a sin offering? Though technically she did not commit any sin, therefore she brings a sin offering, as the commentaries explain, and as the mystics tell us, this is still because a woman's pain and suffering that she has at childbirth is still a continuation of the sin of the tree of knowledge that Chava has done. Therefore, a sin offering is still to atone for the sin of the tree of knowledge that was caused by the woman. Chapter 13, verse 1. Now that we've concluded the laws pertaining to the woman's childbirth and her defilement and impurities, then the Torah moves on to telling us now what most of the bulk of this Torah reading is going to be about, and the next Torah reading as well, about the laws pertaining to tzaras. Tzaras, generally translated as leprosy, though that is not commonly known as we know as leprosy, it is a biblical and godly, miraculous type of disease that comes to a person, which we no longer have today, and therefore, as we will learn, the technicalities of it is something that happened to an individual who otherwise had a beautiful character and moral excellence, but because he committed the sin of gossip, usually this or slander, haughtiness, is what brought about this disease. And God spoke to Moshe and Aaron saying, Adam, amen. If a person develops, if he develops in the skin of the flesh of his hand, a wool white spot or an egg membrane white spot, or a snow white spot, and this will develop on the skin of his flesh. This disease, this lesion of a tzaras, and he will bring this to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim, who will then determine what this tzaras is. Rashi, What would these three items, which we mentioned was a wool white spot, egg membrane spot, or a snow white spot? These are shmois negoyim heim. They are names of diseases. Ulavanis zumazu. They are different categories of white. As he goes on to explain, Baheres. Baheres is a level of white, which is a snow white spot. Chabarburis, which these are spots, tags, or stains. Boiru b'shchokim. This is we find the same terminology, bohir, like bright in the clouds, and therefore you're seeing these spots, these white spots that are coming on the person. El arim, why does he bring it to arim? This is a decree by the verse that the only one that can determine if a person is impure is a Kohen. That even if the Kohen doesn't know the laws, he has to go to an Israelite who may know the laws, and then he tells the Kohen what to pronounce. And as the Rebbe explains, and that is because before excommunicating a person or determining that a person is impure, only a Kohen who comes from Aaron, who is doing it out of love for the person, can determine such an idea. Verse 3. And the Kohen will then see the lesion. In the flesh, in the skin and his flesh. The Seir Banega, and the hairs within the lesion, hafach lavan, have turned white. Umare anega, and the appearance of the lesion, omik me'er basari, is deeper than the skin of his flesh. Nega tzaras hu, this is considered a lesion of tzaras. V'ro ha'kohen, and the Kohen will then see it. V'time yosei, and he will make him impure. Rashi. The Seir Banega hafach lavan, and the hair turned white, mitchila shacher, meaning that initially it was black. V'nepach lavan b'teich hanega, and while it was in the lesion, in the spot of the lesion is where it turned white. Umiyat seir, when we talk about seir here, when we talk about the minimal amount, shnayim is 2. That means the minimal amount of 2 hairs have to turn white in order for it to be considered a sign of impurity. Omik meir b'sari, it's deeper than the appearance is deeper than the actual flesh. What does this mean? Kol mari lavan, any time a person sees white, which is compared to a different color, omeku, it's deeper. Kemari chama amuka minatzel, like you have the sun, which is deeper than the shade. Because when you have a place which is brighter and the place around it is darker, it will look like it's deeper. Vitime yoise, yomerle, he has to tell him, tamayata, you are impure. Shaseir lavan siman tumahu, white here is a sign of impurity. Gezeiras hakosov, this is a decree of the verse, no rationale given to it. Verse 4. V'im baheres levanam. These are the rules regarding of what happens now if it starts spreading. So if on the skin of the flesh you have a snow white skin, be'er b'sari, in the skin of his flesh, v'omek ein mara, but his appearance is not deeper than than the affected skin, usa'ar lo yhafach lavan, and its hair did not turn white. Then the Kohen must quarantine the lesion for at least 7 days. Verse 4. Rashi says, I don't understand, what does it mean that it's not deeper? Because generally, as we mentioned previously, Rashi said, when you have a lighter and a darker color, the lighter color will always look deeper. So Rashi says he doesn't understand what this would mean that it doesn't look deeper. V'hizgir, he quarantines him. The Kohen has to then quarantine him in one home, and should not go to him and see him, and should not look at this lesion for the whole week. Then, afterwards, and then afterwards we'll see what the signs, if they spread, and what happened. Verse 5. Then the Kohen on the 7th day must come and examine him. And if the lesion has remained in the same appearance, it did not spread, in his skin, then the Kohen will quarantine him for a second 7 days. Be'enov, 5, verse 5 Rashi, Be'enov with his eyes, B'mar'eyu, in the way it looks. Meaning, the way he sees it, he doesn't see that it spread or anything got worse. And it's still in the same size when he saw it 7 days ago. And he quarantines him a second time. However, but if it did spread in this quarantine time, he is definitely impure. No need to quarantine him, and he has to do all the laws that pertain to a person who has tzaras. Verse 6. Then after the second quarantine week, the Kohen will come and see him on the seventh day. And he must examine it, and he looks at the second time, and if the lesion has become darker, and it did not spread in his flesh, the Kohen will then say he is pure. Mispachasi. This was this has become now, this lesion did not spread, so therefore it's termed a mispachas, which means something that does not cause him to be impure. V'chibes begadav, he washes his clothes. V'tiaher, and he must immerse himself in the mikveh, and then he is pure. Rashi, verse 6, keha. The word keha, this is not a definition. Huchka means that it got darker from the way it looked. Marisei. Ha'im amad b'marisei. But what happens if it stayed the same way, even though it didn't spread? Oy pasa, or it spread. Tamei, he would then become pure. Mispachas, what does the word mispachas mean? Rashi says, Shem negator. This means a clean disease. That means he may have some type of lesion on his, he may have some type of disease on his skin, but it's not one that would make him impure. Because he was considered in quarantine, even though technically he wasn't yet tamei, but he's still considered impure because he was quarantined, and therefore tzarich tvili, he has to immerse himself and wash his clothing. Verse 7. What happens if this mispachas continues to spread in his skin? After he already has shown it to the Kohen to be pure, he has to then show it again for a second time. He has to then bring it to the Kohen again. Verse 8. And the Kohen will then see this initial mispachas, which he thought was pure, spread in his skin. And then the Kohen will pronounce him as he is tamei. Tzarasu. This is now tzaras. It's no longer a mispachas. It became the tzaras. Rashi, verse 8. Once he made him now impure, he's considered a full-fledged Metzora. He now needs all the process, which is the birds, the shaving, the sacrifices, everything that we're going to explain later on in the Torah reading of Metzora. Tzarasi, this is considered tzaras, even though initially it was mispachas. Now we've come to realize that this mispachas, which was called a clean, a pure lesion, has now turned to something which is impure. Tzaras, lashon nekeva, the reason why it's in a female terminology. Nega, however, the word disease or lesion, lashon zachar, is a male terminology. And sometimes we're going to find that it uses the terminology nega, and sometimes we'll use the terminology tzaras, and sometimes both. Verse 9. Nega tzaras, kitiya ba'adam. If a person has a white lesion, nega tzaras kitiya ba'adam, if a person has a white lesion which is in tzaras, which looks like he has tzaras, what does he need to do? He has to be brought to the Kohen to see and to examine what's going on. Verse 10. And the Kohen will then examine it. And the Kohen will then see that there's a wool white spot in his skin. And as well as the hairs that were formerly black now turned white. And or there is a wool white spot, but also with a patch of live flesh. So there's two things can be: either that the hair turned white, or he has live flesh there. Rashi, meaning live flesh, shinmint, that it's getting better in the middle. That if a little bit of the white, that means he has a white spot, and in the middle of the white a little bit became flesh, that looked like it's healing. You should know that's also a sign of impurity. Seir love, and what if he only has white here? Without that live flesh, if you want to call it michya below seir love, or even he has the flesh without the white here. Either one of them, that means it's not that you have to have both. The Torah is telling us either you have the black hair that turned white, which is in the spot, like we mentioned previously, or that within the white spot you see a place of regular flesh, and that will make him impure as well. Even though it only says michya by this type of disease lesion, which is a wool white time, this applies even by the membrane white, or by the wool white, or by the one that by the snow white, any type of lesion. If there is a little bit of a healthy spot in the side of the lesion, that will also be a sign of impurity. Verse 11, this is now considered a case of an old tzaras remaining under the skin of his flesh, meaning there was an old tzaras that's just under the flesh. And therefore the kohen will make him impure. He doesn't even have to quarantine him, because he can be pronounced defiled, impure on the spot. Tzaras nishenes, what does it mean? Over here the Torah is giving an example and explaining of why in this case, even though there's healthy flesh in the middle of the lesion, that he's still considered impure. There's an old wound that's under this flesh, and therefore this wound looks healthy on top. But really, underneath it is full of pus. One shouldn't say, a person would say, oh look, he's already getting healed because look, the lesion's healing. Should be tar, he should be now pure. Therefore the Torah tells us no, this is telling us this is an old tzaras, it's explaining the reason, and therefore saying this person is considered impure. Verse 12. What happens if now the tzaras erupts all over the skin, to the extent that the v'chisus tzaras is kolir anega merishav adraglav, that tzaras covers the entire person from head to toe. Whatever the kohen can see, he sees that the person's completely full of tzaras. Rashi, from the top, from the head to toe of the person that he sees is completely covered in tzaras. This excludes a kohen who has a hard time seeing. So this is specifically talking about to a kohen who is able to tell what's going on by the different and able to examine things, and therefore a kohen who cannot see it is unfit of determining if a person has tzaras or not. Verse 13. The kohen will then see that the tzaras covers the entire flesh of the individual, and he will then pronounce the person as he is purified. The lesion is rid of defilement. It's not considered something unholy, impure. He has now turned completely white, and therefore he is not defiled, because this is a natural condition of his body. Verse 14. However, going back, that if the person has, on the day that a patch of live flesh, the size of a lentil bean, appears in it, he will then become defiled. Where is this talking about? Which are we referring to? Why does he have to come along and tell me that if you see fresh skin, that makes him impure? We just learned it before in the previous verse. Hello. Over here we're talking about what happens if the lesion of the disease is in one of the 24 limbs, for example, at the tips of his limbs, for example, the top of his fingers, his toes. Those, if it's on the tips, they don't become tamei because of fresh skin. Because you cannot see the entire disease at once. Because when you talk about the tips of the toes or the fingers, you can't see the side of the finger, the hand, and at the same time the tips. Therefore, you have to be able to see the disease and the fresh skin all at once in order for something to become impure. What happens if now the person gets fatter, his fingers get fatter, for example, so now you could see the tip of his finger together with the rest of the lesion that he has there. So now it appeared, so this is going back to the case before, where the person had a lesion that had no fresh flesh in it. Then all of a sudden the fresh flesh appears on the top of his fingers, so to speak. But at first you don't see it because since it's not connected. But then the person gets a little fatter, and then you can see as the fingers and the bottom part of it, of the fingers, the top of the part of the fingers all connect, then the person will become impure as well. Why does it say ubiyoim and in the day? Ma talmud leber biyim. Lalamid tell us sheyeshem shatarei boy. There are days that you could examine for leprosy. There are days that you don't examine for tzaras. Mikan number from here we know chasan, a groom. For example, if a person just got married and then somebody says, "Oh wow, I think he has tzaras," you give him the whole 7 days that he's with his wife, and the Kohen does not examine him. Loi vehein. This doesn't only apply to him, but this applies to his garments, to his clothing, to his home. So too on the holidays they would not examine. They would not examine tzaras throughout the days of the holidays so that people can appreciate and enjoy the holiday, and only after the holidays, the Yomim Tovim, when they then examine. Verse 15. The Kohen will then see and examine the healthy live flesh. And because he has the healthy live flesh, that will make the person tamei, impure. Tamehu, he is now defiled. Tzarasu, it is considered tzaras. Rashi, tzarasu, abasarhu, that flesh that he now sees, basar therefore uses lashon zachar, and in this case as well, tzaras is male terminology, and basar is male terminology as well. Verse 16, or what happens if this flesh now turns white, and will come in and show it to the Kohen as well. And the Kohen will then see, and now this disease turned white, and then the Kohen will pronounce him as the lesion is defiled, and he is considered rid of this impurity, and he is toyer, he is pure. Verse 18. Ubasar, now we talk about tzaras that develops out of an inflammation. Ubasar kiyeh beiboirei. And when if a person now, this develops of a partially healed inflammation, the diagnosis may differ. Now what happens if this tzaras can develop on a person's flesh, and if there's like an inflammation, therefore it uses shchin, and the skin, the inflammation of its skin, and then venirpa, and it heals. Rashi, what does this mean? So Rashi explains as follows. How does a person get this shchin? What does the word shchin mean? Generally, shchin is translated, as we know, by the plagues as boils. But over here it tells us loshin chimum. It means out of heat, meaning it's a localized heat resulting from an infection. You can see that when a person has an infection, the area around the wound is warm. And that's what he's referring to as shchin, is if a person gets some type of infection in his body, that his body became warm because of an infection, a wound that he has. Not because he burnt himself, is because there's an infection brewing underneath which causes the body to be warm. Vinirpa. Meaning that this now inflammation started to heal. And in the place of where it was, the infection, now he got another lesion, he got a disease. Verse 19. And in the location where of that partially healed inflammation, he now got either a wool white spot or a snow white spot, adam demes, with the red streaks in it, and he has to show it to the Kohen. Verse 19, it's not completely white. It's mixed and combined, and it has red streaks running through it. Verse 20. And the Kohen will see it. And the appearance of the snow white or white spot is lower than the skin. And its here also turned white. The Kohen will then make him impure. This is considered a lesion of tzaras, bashchin paracha, and it erupted in this inflammation that he had. Rashi. Mareh shuffle. If it ain't mamasha shuffle, it doesn't mean that it's literally lower than the rest of it. It's just its appearance, because it's a different color. It looks lower and deeper than anything else, as we mentioned previously. Like the sun looks deeper than the shade. Verse 22. Verse 21. However, if the Kohen comes, and he looks in the inflammation, and there is no white hair, and it doesn't look deeper than the skin, and it got darker, and then the Kohen has to quarantine him for 7 days. Verse 22, what happens if it continues to spread in the flesh? V'timei hakoyin oisei, the Kohen will then make him impure. Negahi, this is considered a lesion of disease of taras. Negahi haseis haseisa beheres. This, going back previously, this wool spot or the white spot or the snow white spot is considered a lesion, and therefore he uses the terminology he, which is the female terminology of beheres. Verse 23. But if the Kohen contains it, and it does not contain any white hair, and any of that, and if it has spread, if the snow white spot or remained the same size, it did not spread, then we must say that this is the scar tissue of the inflammation, and then the Kohen will pronounce him clean, ritually pure. Tachteo means b'mkoyim, it stayed in its spot, it didn't spread. Tzareves hashchin, Unkelos explains, roishim shechina, it's a leftovers, it's a remnant of the inflammation that he had, it's a scar. In el roishim hachimu manikar babasar, this is a scar from the infection that he had in his flesh. Rashi continues and he says, Kol tzareves, anytime you have the word tzareves in the verse, lashon rigias oira, means a combination where the skin and the flesh becomes like condensed. Hanir gamach meschimum, which becomes soft, and it becomes condensed and becomes soft because of the infection that was there. That the prophecy that he talks about the destruction of the temple, where the heat of the fire causes that everything to become closed in on one another and to become destroyed because of it. Tzareves, as Rashi translates, right rishmin bilaz. The means comes squashed together, squeezed, or coming together as one. This concludes the Torah reading for the first day of Parshas Tazria-Metzora.